James MacGregor was a man of many curiosities. He was intrigued by all manner of things, and this curiosity extended also to the fearsome water demons known as kelpies. He was aware that one lived in Loch Ness, for often people would go for a stroll by the water and never return. MacGregor longed for nothing more than to eventually see this kelpie so he might discover more about the elusive and terrifying beast. That day came when MacGregor was making his way down a lonely path between Strathspey and Inverness when he spied, at the side of the water, a dashing stallion, wearing the finest tack he had ever seen. A more foolish man, at this point, would be deceived, thinking the horse to have lost its master, mount it, and attempt to take it back to its master, or keep it for himself. At that moment, the kelpie would seize its opportunity and plunge into the water, giving up the victim's soul to his master, Satan, while devouring the body itself. However, MacGregor was a wise man, and he knew all too well the stories of kelpies. As he approached, the horse pretended to graze and mind its own business, obviously looking forward to the full belly it believed it would have in just a few moments. But before the beast could realize what was happening, MacGregor drew his hefty claymore and struck the kelpie's nose. The kelpie yelped in fright and rushed backwards. The sword had sliced through the kelpie's bridle, and now its bit lay on the ground. MacGregor inspected it, finding that it was fine and shiny, perhaps the nicest bit he had ever seen. When the kelpie had recovered from the initial shock of the blow, MacGregor straightened and readied himself to face the beast in combat. He pointed his sword at the kelpie, but instead of attacking, the kelpie only looked at him with pleading eyes. "What do you want from me?" it asked. "I have heard you are an honourable man. Why do you now attack a defenceless animal? Kelpie or horse, I did you no harm." As the kelpie spoke, MacGregor slowly lowered his sword, for it was becoming obvious that the beast had no interest in combat. The kelpie continued its petition. "You have treated me with cruelty, and for that I should attack you with double the force of your own. But lucky for you," said the kelpie, "I resent such violence, and only ask that you return my bit to me and we might part ways peacefully." MacGregor considered the kelpie's offer for a moment. "Why should I return this bit to you, when your kind have spirited away so many good folk?" The kelpie sighed. "Indeed, we kelpies must partake in such dreadful undertakings, but surely you can appreciate that necessity is no law. My actions are not at one with my feelings. I do what I must to earn an honest living, so if you would, please return to me my bit." MacGregor laughed. An honest living? He didn't believe the kelpie could be honest for a moment, and so a plan started to formulate in his mind. He was all too aware of the kelpie's careful attention on the bit, so he resolved to find out more about what it could do. "I still disapprove of your work, but you seem as honest as a kelpie can be," said MacGregor. "Very well, I will return this bit to you if you reveal to me its every secret." "Our bridles are imbued with transformational powers," the kelpie explained. "Without it, I am no more than a horse. My powers are at an end, and should the bit not be returned within 24 hours, I am certain to perish. As much as I loathe to admit it, you are the stronger than me as long as you hold my bit. If you look through the holes in the bit," the kelpie continued, "you will see all manners of fairies and witches and devils." MacGregor lifted the bit to his eyes and peered through, and sure enough, the world he saw was bright with colour and full of beings invisible to the human eye. He was so enamored by the contraption that he wanted to study it in more detail. He was also not deaf to the kelpie's claim that without the bit he would die, and MacGregor saw an opportunity to free the people of the surrounding area from the kelpie's reign of terror. "I am impressed with your honesty, but I find I am quite fond of this contraption," MacGregor said at last. "I think I might keep it." The kelpie looked at MacGregor with wild eyes. "What, you will break our deal, you dishonourable man?" Without another word, MacGregor turned on his heel to head home, with the bit safely stashed away in his pocket. The walk was short, but the whole way the kelpie followed him. "The joke has run its course," the kelpie said. "Surely you don't mean to take my bridle?" What began as good humor quickly turned sour as the kelpie grew more and more irritated and worried for his bit being taken from him, and when his anger flared, MacGregor flashed his claymore, which settled the kelpie, who knew he could not face MacGregor in his current state. Soon, MacGregor's house appeared over the hill, and the kelpie galloped off in its direction and stood as a statue by the door. "MacGregor will never pass across the threshold as long as he holds the bit," the kelpie declared. But MacGregor was a wily fellow, and without so much as a sigh he moved around to the back of the house and called his wife to the window and passed the bit to her. Once the bit was safely in his house, MacGregor returned to the front door where the kelpie still stood. MacGregor sighed and said with a shrug, "I regret that the bit is no longer in my possession, kelpie, for it is now in my wife's keeping and I cannot return it to you." Anger and panic flashed through the kelpie's eyes, and he hunted for a way to enter the house and take his bit back. He made to enter the house but realized he could not, for there was a roan cross above the door. The kelpie, sorely hurt by the trick, turned and started to walk back in the direction of his river, cursing MacGregor as he went. The magical kelpie's bit remained with MacGregor for the rest of his days, and he learned many things of the other world thanks to its powers. Rarely is a kelpie the victim of a trick, but after that day, no one went missing on the banks of Loch Ness ever again, all thanks to the cunning of James MacGregor. The Glass Mountain. Once upon a time there was a glass mountain at the top of which stood a castle made of pure gold, and in front of the castle there grew an apple tree on which there were golden apples. Anyone who picked an apple gained admittance into the golden castle, and there in a silver room sat an enchanted princess of surpassing fairness and beauty. She was as rich too as she was beautiful, for the cellars of the castle were full of precious stones, and great chests of the finest gold stood round the walls of all the rooms. Many knights had come from afar to try their luck, but it was in vain they attempted to climb the mountain. In spite of having their horses shod with sharp nails, no one managed to get more than halfway up, and then they all fell back right down to the bottom of the steep, slippery hill. Sometimes they broke an arm, sometimes a leg, and many a brave man had broken his neck even. The beautiful princess sat at her window and watched the bold knights trying to reach her on their splendid horses. The sight of her always gave men fresh courage, and they flocked from the four quarters of the globe to attempt the work of rescuing her. But all in vain, and for 7 years the princess had sat now and waited for someone to scale the glass mountain. A heap of corpses, both of riders and horses, lay round the mountain, and many dying men lay groaning there, unable to go any farther with their wounded limbs. The whole neighbourhood had the appearance of a vast churchyard. In 3 more days the 7 years would be at an end, when a knight in golden armour and mounted on a spirited steed was seen making his way towards the fatal hill. Sticking his spurs into his horse, he made a rush at the mountain and got up halfway. Then he calmly turned his horse's head and came down again without a slip or stumble. The following day he started in the same way. The horse trod on the glass as if it had been level earth, and sparks of fire flew from its hoofs. All the other knights gazed in astonishment, for he had almost gained the summit, and in another moment he would have reached the apple tree, but of a sudden a huge eagle rose up and spread its mighty wings, hitting it as it did so the knight's horse in the eye. The beast shied, opened its wide nostrils and tossed its mane, then rearing high up in the air, its hind feet slipped and it fell with its rider down the steep mountainside. Nothing was left of either of them except their bones, which rattled in the battered golden armour like dry peas in a pod. And now there was only one more day before the close of the 7 years. Then there arrived on the scene a mere schoolboy, a merry, happy-hearted youth, but at the same time strong and well-grown. He saw how many knights had broken their necks in vain, but undaunted he approached the steep mountain on foot and began the ascent. For long he had heard his parents speak of the beautiful princess who sat in the golden castle at the top of the glass mountain. He listened to all he heard and determined that he too would try his luck. But first he went to the forest and caught a lynx, and cutting off the creature's sharp claws, he fastened them onto his own hands and feet. Armed with these weapons, he boldly started up the glass mountain. The sun was nearly going down, and the youth had not got more than halfway up. He could hardly draw breath, he was so worn out, and his mouth was parched by thirst. A huge black cloud passed over his head, but in vain did he beg and beseech her to let a drop of water fall on him. He opened his mouth, but the black cloud sailed past, and not as much as a drop of dew moistened his dry lips. His feet were torn and bleeding, and he could only hold on now with his hands. Evening closed in, and he strained his eyes to see if he could behold the top of the mountain. Then he gazed beneath him, and what a sight met his eyes! A yawning abyss, with certain and terrible death at the bottom, reeking with half-decayed bodies of horses and riders. And this had been the end of all the other brave men who, like himself, had attempted the ascent. It was almost pitch dark now, and only the stars lit up the glass mountain. The poor boy still clung on as if glued to the glass by his blood-stained hands. He made no struggle to get higher, for all his strength had left him, and seeing no hope he calmly awaited death. Then all of a sudden he fell into a deep sleep, and forgetful of his dangerous position, he slumbered sweetly. But all the same, although he slept, he had stuck his sharp claws so firmly into the glass that he was quite safe not to fall. Now the golden apple tree was guarded by the eagle which had overthrown the golden knight and his horse. Every night it flew round the glass mountain keeping a careful lookout, and no sooner had the moon emerged from the clouds than the bird rose up from the apple tree, and circling round in the air, caught sight of the sleeping youth. Greedy for carrion, and sure that this must be a fresh corpse, the bird swooped down upon the boy. But he was awake now, and perceiving the eagle, he determined by its help to save himself. The eagle dug its sharp claws into the tender flesh of the youth, but he bore the pain without a sound, and seized the bird's 2 feet with his hands. The creature in terror lifted him high up into the air and began to circle round the tower of the castle. The youth held on bravely. He saw the glittering palace, which by the pale rays of the moon looked like a dim lamp, and he saw the high windows, and round one of them a balcony in which the beautiful princess sat lost in sad thoughts. Then the boy saw that he was close to the apple tree, and drawing a small knife from his belt, he cut off both the eagle's feet. The bird rose up in the air in its agony and vanished into the clouds, and the youth fell onto the broad branches of the apple tree. Then he drew out the claws of the eagle's feet that had remained in his flesh, and put the peel of one of the golden apples on the wound, and in one moment it was healed and well again. He pulled several of the beautiful apples and put them in his pocket. Then he entered the castle. The door was guarded by a great dragon, but as soon as he threw an apple at it, the beast vanished. At the same moment a gate opened, and the youth perceived a courtyard full of flowers and beautiful trees, and on a balcony sat the lovely enchanted princess with her retinue. As soon as she saw the youth, she ran towards him and greeted him as her husband and master. She gave him all her treasures, and the youth became a rich and mighty ruler. But he never returned to the earth, for only the mighty eagle, who had been the guardian of the princess and of the castle, could have carried on his wings the enormous treasure down to the world. But as the eagle had lost its feet, it died, and its body was found in a wood on the glass mountain. One day when the youth was strolling about in the palace garden with the princess, his wife, he looked down over the edge of the glass mountain and saw to his astonishment a great number of people gathered there. He blew his silver whistle, and the swallow who acted as messenger in the golden castle flew past. "Fly down and ask what the matter is," he said to the little bird, who sped off like lightning and soon returned saying, The blood of the eagle has restored all the people below to life. All those who have perished on this mountain are awakening up today, as it were from a sleep, and are mounting their horses, and the whole population are gazing on this unheard of wonder with joy and amazement. There was once a woman who had 2 girls. One was her own daughter, the other a stepchild. Holna, her own daughter, she loved dearly, but she couldn't bear even the sight of Marushka, the stepchild. This was because Marushka was so much prettier than Holna. Marushka, the dear child, didn't know how pretty she was, and so she never understood why, whenever she stood beside Holna, the stepmother frowned so crossly. Mother and daughter made Marushka do all the housework alone. She had to cook and wash and sew and spin and take care of the garden and look after the cow. Holna, on the contrary, spent all her time decking herself out and sitting around like a grand lady. Marushka never complained. She did all she was told to do and bore patiently their everlasting fault finding. In spite of all the hard work she did, she grew prettier from day to day, and in spite of her lazy life, Holna grew uglier. This will never do, the stepmother thought to herself. Soon the boys will come courting, and once they see how pretty Marushka is, they'll pay no attention at all to my Holna. We had just better do all we can to get rid of that Marushka as soon as possible. So they both nagged Marushka all day long. They made her work harder, they beat her, they didn't give her enough to eat, they did everything they could think of to make her ugly and nasty. But all to no avail. Marushka was so good and sweet that, in spite of all their harsh treatment, she kept on growing prettier. One day, in the middle of January, Holna took the notion that nothing would do, but she must have a bunch of fragrant violets to put in her bodice. Marushka, she ordered sharply, "I want some violets. Go out to the forest and get me some." "Good heavens, my dear sister," cried poor Marushka. "What can you be thinking of? Whoever heard of violets growing under the snow in January?" "What, you lazy little slattern!" Holna shouted. "You dare to argue with me? You go this minute, and if you come back without violets, I'll kill you." The stepmother sided with Holna, and taking Marushka roughly by the shoulder, she pushed her out of the house and slammed the door. The poor child climbed slowly up the mountainside, weeping bitterly. All around the snow lay deep, with no track of man or beast in any direction. Marushka wandered on, weak with hunger and shaking with cold. "Dear God in heaven," she prayed, "take me to yourself, away from all this suffering." Suddenly ahead of her she saw a glowing light. She struggled towards it and found at last that it came from a great fire that was burning on the top of the mountain. Around the fire there were 12 stones, one of them much bigger and higher than the rest. 12 men were seated on the stones. 3 of them were very old and white, 3 were not so old, 3 were middle-aged, and 3 were beautiful youths. They did not talk. They sat silent, gazing at the fire. They were the 12 months. For a moment Marushka was frightened and hesitated. Then she stepped forward and said politely, "Kind sirs, may I warm myself at your fire? I am shaking with cold." Great January nodded his head, and Marushka reached her stiff fingers towards the flames. "This is no place for you, my child," Great January said. "Why are you here?" "I'm hunting for violets," Marushka answered. "Violets? This is no time to look for violets with snow on the ground." "I know that, sir, but my sister, Holna, says I must bring her violets from the forest or she'll kill me, and my mother says so, too. Please, sir, won't you tell me where I can find some?" Great January slowly stood up and walked over to the youngest month. He handed him a long staff and said, "Here, March, you take the high seat." So March took the high seat and began waving the staff over the fire. The fire blazed up, and instantly the snow all about began to melt. The trees burst into bud, the grass revived, the little pink buds of the daisies appeared, and, lo, it was spring. While Marushka looked, Violets began to peep out from among the leaves, and soon it was as if a great blue quilt had been spread on the ground. "Now, Marushka," March cried, "there are your violets, pick them quickly." Marushka was overjoyed. She stooped down and gathered a great bunch. Then she thanked the months politely, bade them good day, and hurried away. Just imagine Holno and the stepmother's surprise when they saw Marushka coming home through the snow with her hands full of violets. They opened the door, and instantly the fragrance of the flowers filled the cottage. "Where did you get them?" Holna demanded rudely. "High up in the mountain," Marushka said. "The ground up there is covered with them." Holna snatched the violets and fastened them in her waist. She kept smelling them herself all afternoon, and she let her mother smell them, but she never once said to Marushka, "Dear sister, won't you take a smell?" The next day, as she was sitting idle in the chimney corner, she took the notion that she must have some strawberries to eat. So she called Marushka and said, "Here you, Marushka, go out to the forest and get me some strawberries." "Good heavens, my dear sister," Marushka said, "where can I find strawberries this time of year? Who ever heard of strawberries growing under the snow?" "What, you lazy little slattern," Holna shouted. "You dare to argue with me? You go this minute, and if you come back without strawberries, I'll kill you." Again the stepmother sided with Holna, and taking Marushka roughly by the shoulder, she pushed her out of the house and slammed the door. Again the poor child climbed slowly up the mountainside, weeping bitterly. All around the snow lay deep, with no track of man or beast in any direction. Marushka wandered on and on, weak with hunger and shaking with cold. At last she saw ahead of her the glow of the same fire that she had seen the day before. With happy heart she hastened to it. 12 months were seated as before with great January on the high seat. Marushka bowed politely and said, "Kind sirs, may I warm myself at your fire? I am shaking with cold." Great January nodded, and Marushka reached her stiff fingers towards the flames. But Marushka, Great January said, "Why are you here again? What are you hunting now?" "I'm hunting for strawberries," Marushka answered. "Strawberries, but Marushka, my child, it is winter and strawberries do not grow in the snow." Marushka shook her head sadly. "I know that, sir, but my sister, Holna, says I must bring her strawberries from the forest or she will kill me, and my mother says so, too. Please, sir, won't you tell me where I can find some?" Great January slowly stood up and walked over to the monk who sat opposite him. He handed him the long staff and said, "Here, June, you take the high seat." So June took the high seat and began waving the staff over the fire. The flames blazed high, and with the heat the snow all about melted instantly. The earth grew green, the trees decked themselves in leaves, the birds began to sing, flowers bloomed, and lo, it was summer. Presently little starry white blossoms covered the ground under the beech trees. Soon these turned to fruit, first green, then pink, then red, and, with a gasp of delight, Marushka saw that they were ripe strawberries. "Now, Marushka," June cried, "there are your strawberries, pick them quickly." Marushka picked an apron full of berries. Then she thanked the months politely, bade them goodbye, and hurried home. Just imagine again Holna and the stepmother's surprise as they saw Marushka coming through the snow with an apron full of strawberries. They opened the door, and instantly the fragrance of the berries filled the house. "Where did you get them?" Holna demanded rudely. "High up in the mountain," Marushka answered, "under the beech trees." Holna took the strawberries and gobbled and gobbled and gobbled. Then the stepmother ate all she wanted, but it never occurred to either of them to say, "Here, Marushka, you take one." The next day, when Holna was sitting idle, as usual, in the chimney corner, the notion took her that she must have some red apples. So she called Marushka and said, "Here you, Marushka, go out to the forest and get me some red apples." "But, my dear sister," Marushka gasped, "where can I find red apples in winter?" "What, you lazy little slattern, you dare to argue with me? You go this minute, and if you come back without red apples, I'll kill you." For the third time the stepmother sided with Holner and, taking Marushka roughly by the shoulder, pushed her out of the house and slammed the door. So again the poor child went out to the forest. All around the snow lay deep with no track of man or beast in any direction. This time Marushka hurried straight to the mountain top. She found the monks still seated about their fire with Great January still on the high stone. Marushka bowed politely and said, "Kind sirs, may I warm myself at your fire? I am shaking with cold." Great January nodded, and Marushka reached her stiff fingers towards the flames. "Why are you here again, Marushka?" Great January asked. "What are you looking for now?" "Red apples," Marushka answered. "My sister, Holna, says I must bring her some red apples from the forest or she will kill me, and my mother says so too. Please, sir, won't you tell me where I can find some?" Great January slowly stood up and walked over to one of the older monks. He handed him the long staff and said, "Here, September, you take the high seat." So September took the high seat and began waving the staff over the fire. Fire burned and glowed. Instantly the snow disappeared. The fields about looked brown and yellow and dry. From the trees the leaves dropped one by one, and a cool breeze scattered them over the stubble. There were not many flowers, only wild asters on the hillside, and meadow saffron in the valleys, and under the beeches, ferns and ivy. Presently Marushka spied an apple tree weighted down with ripe fruit. "There, Marushka," September called, "there are your apples. Gather them quickly." Marushka reached up and picked one apple. Then she picked another. "That's enough, Marushka," September shouted. "Don't pick any more." Marushka obeyed at once. Then she thanked the monks politely, bade them goodbye, and hurried home. Polno and her stepmother were more surprised than ever to see Marushka coming through the snow with red apples in her hands. They let her in and grabbed the apples from her. "Where did you get them?" Polno demanded. "High up on the mountain," Marushka answered. "There are plenty of them growing there." "Plenty of them, and you only brought us 2. Polno cried angrily. "Or did you pick more and eat them yourself on the way home?" No, my dear sister," Marushka said. "I haven't eaten any, truly I haven't. They wouldn't let me pick any more than 2. They shouted to me not to pick any more. I wish the lightning had struck you dead." Holna sneered. "I've a good mind to beat you." After a time the greedy Holna left off her scolding to eat one of the apples. It had so delicious a flavor that she declared she had never in all her life tasted anything so good. Her mother said the same. When they had finished both the apples they began to wish for more. "Mother," Holna said, "go get me my fur cloak. I'm going up the mountain myself. No use sending that lazy little slattern again, for she would only eat up all the apples on the way home. I'll find that tree, and when I pick the apples I'd like to see anybody stop me." The mother begged Holna not to go out in such weather, but Holna was headstrong and would go. She threw her fur cloak over her shoulders and put a shawl on her head, and off she went up the mountainside. All around the snow lay deep with no track of man or beast in any direction. Holna wandered on and on, determined to find those wonderful apples. At last she saw a light in the distance, and when she reached it she found it was the great fire about which the 12 monks were seated. At first she was frightened, but soon growing bold, she elbowed her way through the circle of men, and without so much as saying, "By your leave," she put out her hands to the fire. She hadn't even the courtesy to say good day. Great January frowned. "Who are you?" he asked in a deep voice. What do you want?" Holna looked at him rudely. "You old fool, what business is it of yours who I am or what I want?" She tossed her head airily and walked off into the forest. The frown deepened on Great January's brow. Slowly he stood up and waved the staff over his head. The fire died down. Then the sky grew dark. An icy wind blew over the mountain, and the snow began to fall so thickly that it looked as if someone in the sky were emptying a huge feather bed. Olna could not see a step before her. She struggled on and on. Now she ran into a tree, now she fell into a snowdrift. In spite of her warm cloak, her limbs began to weaken and grow numb. The snow kept on falling, the icy wind kept on blowing. Did Holna at last begin to feel sorry that she had been so wicked and cruel to Marushka? No, she did not. Instead, the colder she grew, the more bitterly she reviled Marushka in her heart, the more bitterly she reviled even the good God himself. Meanwhile, at home, her mother waited for her and waited. She stood at the window as long as she could. Then she opened the door and tried to peer through the storm. She waited and waited, but no Holna came. Oh dear, what can be keeping her? She thought to herself. Does she like those apples so much that she can't leave them, or what is it? I think I'll have to go out myself and find her. So the stepmother put her fur cloak about her shoulders, threw a shawl over her head, and started out. She called Hola Holna, but no one answered. She struggled on and on up the mountainside. All around, the snow lay deep with no track of man or beast in any direction. Holna! Still no answer. The snow fell fast. The icy wind moaned on. At home, Marushka prepared the dinner and looked after the cow. Still neither Holna nor the stepmother returned. What can they be doing all this time? Marushka thought. She ate her dinner alone and then sat down to work at the distaff. The spindle filled and daylight faded, and still no sign of Holna and her mother. Dear God in heaven, what can be keeping them? Marushka cried anxiously. She peered out the window to see if they were coming. The storm had spent itself. The wind had died down. The fields gleamed white in the snow, and up in the sky the frosty stars were twinkling brightly. But not a living creature was in sight. Marushka knelt down and prayed for her sister and mother. The next morning she prepared breakfast for them. They'll be very cold and hungry, she said to herself. She waited for them, but they didn't come. She cooked dinner for them, but still they didn't come. In fact, they never came, for they both froze to death on the mountain. So our good little Marushka inherited the cottage and the garden and the cow. After a time she married a farmer. He made her a good husband, and they lived together very happily. The Cossacks. The olden times were not like the times we live in. In the olden times all manner of evil powers walked abroad. The world itself was not then as it is now. Now there are no such evil powers among us. I'll tell you a Kaska story of the Tsar of the forest, that you may know what manner of being he was. Once upon a time, long, long ago, beyond the times that we can call to mind, ere yet our great-grandfathers or their grandfathers had been born into the world, there lived a poor man and his wife, and they had one only son, who was not as an only son ought to be to his old father and mother. So idle and lazy was that only son that heaven help him. He would do nothing. He would not even fetch water from the well, but lay on the stove all day long and rolled among the warm cinders. If they gave him anything to eat, he ate it, and if they didn't give him anything to eat, he did without. His father and mother fretted sorely because of him, and said, "What are we to do with thee, O son, for thou art good for nothing. Other people's children are a stay and a support to their parents, but thou art but a fool, and dost consume our bread for naught." But it was of no use at all. He would do nothing but sit on the stove and play with the cinders. So his father and mother grieved over him for many a long day, and at last his mother said to his father, "What is to be done with our son? Thou dost see that he has grown up and yet is of no use to us, and he is so foolish that we can do nothing with him. Look now, if we can send him away, let us send him away. If we can hire him out, let us hire him out. Perchance other folk may be able to do more with him than we can. So his father and mother laid their heads together and sent him to a tailor's to learn tailoring. There he remained 3 days, but then he ran away home, climbed up on the stove, and again began playing with the cinders. His father then gave him a sound drubbing and sent him to a cobbler's to learn cobbling, but again he ran away home. His father gave him another drubbing and sent him to a blacksmith to learn smith's work. But there too he did not remain long, but ran away home again. So what was that poor father to do? "I'll tell thee what I'll do with thee, thou son of a dog," said he. "I'll take thee, thou lazy lout, into another kingdom. There, perchance, they will be able to teach thee better than they can hear, and it will be too far for thee to run home." So he took him and set out on his journey. They went on and on. They went a short way, and they went a long way, and at last they came to a forest so dark that they could see neither earth nor sky. They went through this forest, but in a short time they grew very tired, and when they came to a path leading to a clearing full of large tree stumps, the father said, "I am so tired out that I will rest here a little." And with that he sat down on a tree stump and cried, "Oh, how tired I am." He had no sooner said these words than out of the tree stump, nobody could say how, sprang such a little old man, also wrinkled and puckered, and his beard was quite green and reached right down to his knee. "What dost thou want of me, O man?" he asked. The man was amazed at the strangeness of his coming to light, and said to him, "I did not call thee. Begone, how canst thou say that when thou didst call me?" asked the little old man. "Who art thou then?" asked the father. "I am old, the tsar of the woods," replied the old man. "Why didst thou call me, I say? Away with thee." "I did not call thee," said the man. "What, thou didst not call me when thou saidst, oh, I was tired, and therefore I said, oh," replied the man. "Whither art thou going?" asked Oh. "The wide world lies before me," sighed the man. "I am taking the sorry blockhead of mine to hire him out to somebody or other. Perchance other people may be able to knock more sense into him than we can at home, but send him whither we will, he always comes running home again. To hire him out to me, I'll warrant I'll teach him," said Oh. "Yet I'll only take him on one condition. Thou shalt come back for him when a year has run. And if thou dost know him again, thou mayst take him, but if thou dost not know him again, he shall serve another year with me." "Good," cried the man. So they shook hands upon it, had a good drink to clinch the bargain, and the man went back to his own home, while Oh took the son away with him. Oh took the son away with him, and they passed into the other world, the world beneath the earth, and came to a green hut woven out of rushes. And in this hut everything was green. The walls were green and the benches were green, and Oh's wife was green and his children were green. In fact, everything there was green. And Oh had water nixies for serving maids, and they were all as green as rue. "Sit down now," said Oh to his new labourer, "and have a bit of something to eat." The nixies then brought him some food, and that also was green, and he ate of it. "And now," said Oh, "take my labourer into the courtyard that he may chop wood and draw water." So they took him into the courtyard, but instead of chopping any wood he lay down and went to sleep. Oh came out to see how he was getting on, and there he lay a-snoring. Then Oh seized him, and bade them bring wood, and tie his labourer fast to the wood, and set the wood on fire till the labourer was burned to ashes. Then Oh took the ashes and scattered them to the four winds, but a single piece of burnt coal fell from out of the ashes, and this coal he sprinkled with living water, whereupon the labourer immediately stood there alive again, and somewhat handsomer and stronger than before. Oh again bade him chop wood, but again he went to sleep. Then Oh again tied him to the wood and burnt him, and scattered the ashes to the four winds, and sprinkled the remnant of the coal with living water. And instead of the loutish clown there stood there such a handsome and stalwart Cossack that the like of him can neither be imagined nor described, but only told of in tales. There, Then the lad remained for a year, and at the end of the year the father came for his son. He came to the self-same charred stumps in the self-same forest, sat him down, and said, "Oh." O immediately came out of the charred stump and said, "Hail, O man, to hail to thee, O, and what dost thou want, O man?" asked O. "I have come," said he, "for my son." "O well, come then, if thou dost know him again, thou shalt take him away, but if thou dost not know him, he shall serve with me yet another year." So the man went with O. They came to his hut, and O took all handfuls of millet and scattered it about, and myriads of cocks came running up and pecked it. "Well, dost thou know thy son again?" said O. The man stared and stared. There was nothing but cocks, and one cock was just like another. He could not pick out his son. "Well," said O, "as thou dost not know him, go home again. This year thy son must remain in my service." So the man went home again. The second year passed away, and the man again went to O. He came to the charred stumps and said, "O," and O popped out of the tree stump again. "Come," said he, "and see if thou canst recognize him now." Then he took him to a sheep pen, and there were rows and rows of rams, and one ram was just like another. The man stared and stared, but he could not pick out his son. "Thou mayst as well go home then," said O, "but thy son shall live with me yet another year." So the man went away, sad at heart. The third year also passed away, and the man came again to find O. He went on and until there met him an old man all as white as milk, and the raiment of this old man was glistening white. "Hail to thee, O man," said he. "Hail to thee also, my father. Whither doth God lead thee?" "I am going to free my son from O." "How so?" Then the man told the old white father how he had hired out his son to O and under what conditions. Aye, said the old white father, "'tis a vile pagan thou hast to deal with. He will lead thee about by the nose for a long time." "Yes," said the man, "I perceive that he is a vile pagan, but I know not what in the world to do with him. Canst thou not tell me then, dear father, how I may recover my son?" "Yes, I can," said the old man. "Then prithee tell me, darling father, and I'll pray for thee to God all my life, for though he has not been much of a son to me, he is still my own flesh and blood." "Hearken, then," said the old man, "when thou dost go to O, he will let loose a multitude of doves before thee, but choose not one of these doves. The dove thou shalt choose must be the one that comes not out, but remains sitting beneath the pear tree pruning its feathers. That will be thy son." Then the man thanked the old white father and went on. He came to the charred stumps. "Oh," cried he, and out came O and led him to his sylvan realm. There were scattered about handfuls of wheat and called his doves, and there flew down such a multitude of them that there was no counting them, and one dove was just like another. "Dost thou recognize thy son?" I asked O. "And thou knowest him again, he is thine, and thou knowest him not, he is mine." Now all the doves there were pecking at the wheat, all but one that sat alone beneath the pear tree, sticking out its breast and pruning its feathers. "That is my son," said the man. "Since thou hast guessed him, take him," replied O. Then the father took the dove, and immediately it changed into a handsome young man, and a handsomer was not to be found in the wide world. The father rejoiced greatly and embraced and kissed him. "Let us go home, my son," said he. So they went. As they went along the road together they fell a talking, and his father asked him how he had fared at O's. The son told him. Then the father told the son what he had suffered, and it was the son's turn to listen. Furthermore the father said, "What shall we do now? My son, I am poor and thou art poor. Hast thou served these 3 years and are nothing? Grieve not, dear dad. All will come right in the end. Look, there are some young nobles hunting after a fox. I will turn myself into a greyhound and catch the fox. Then the young noblemen will want to buy me of thee, and thou must sell me to them for 300 rubles only. Mind, thou sell me without a chain. Then we shall have lots of money at home, and will live happily together." They went on, and there, on the borders of a forest, some hounds were chasing a fox. They chased it and chased it, but the fox kept on escaping, and the hounds could not run it down. Then the son changed himself into a greyhound, and ran down the fox and killed it. The nobleman thereupon came galloping out of the forest. "Is that thy greyhound?" "It is. It is a good dog. Wilt sell it to us?" The bid for it. "For what dost thou require?" 300 rubles without a chain. "But what do we want with thy chain?" "We would give him a chain of gold, say 100 rubles for nay." "Then take thy money and give us the dog." They counted down the money and took the dog and set off hunting. They sent the dog after another fox. Away he went after it and chased it right into the forest. But then he turned into a youth again and rejoined his father. They went on, and his father said to him, "What use is this money to us after all? It is barely enough to begin housekeeping with and repair our hut. Grieve not, dear dad, we shall get more still. Over yonder are some young noblemen hunting quails with falcons. I will change myself into a falcon, and thou must sell me to them. Only sell me for 300 rubles, and without a hood." They went into the plain, and there were some young noblemen casting their falcon at a quail. The falcon pursued, but always fell short of the quail, and the quail always eluded the falcon. The son then changed himself into a falcon and immediately struck down its prey. The young noblemen saw it and were astonished. "Is that thy falcon?" "It is mine." "Sell it to us, then. Bid for it. But what dost thou want for it?" "If ye give 300 rubles, ye may take it, but it must be without thy hood. As if we want thy hood, we'll make for it a hood worthy of a Tsar." So they higgled and haggled, but at last they gave him the 300 rubles. Then the young nobles sent the falcon after another quail, and it flew and flew till it beat down its prey. But then he became a youth again and went home with his father. "How shall we manage to live with so little?" said the father. "Wait a while, Dad, and we shall have still more," said the son. "When we pass through the fair, I'll change myself into a horse, and thou must sell me. They will give thee 1,000 rubles for me, only sell me without the halter." So when they got to the next little town, where they were holding a fair, the son changed himself into a horse as supple as a serpent, and so fiery that it was dangerous to approach him. The father led the horse along by the halter. It pranced about and struck sparks from the ground with its hoofs. Then the horse dealers came together and began to bargain for it. 1,000 rubles down," said he, "and you may have it, but without the halter." "But what do we want with thy halter?" "We will make for it a silver-gilt halter." "Come, we'll give thee 500. "No," said he. Then up there came a gypsy, blind of one eye. "Bowman, what dost thou want for that horse?" said he. 1,000 rubles without the halter." "Nay, but that is dear." "Little father, wilt thou not take 500 with the halter?" "No, not a bit of it. Take 600 then." Then the gypsy began higgling and haggling, but the man would not give way. "Come, sell it," said he, "with the halter." "No, thou gypsy, I have a liking for that halter, but, my good man, when didst thou ever see them sell a horse without a halter? How then can one lead him off? Nevertheless, the halter must remain mine. But look now, my father, I'll give thee 5 rubles extra. Only I must have the halter." The old man fell a-thinking. "A halter of this kind is worth but 3 grivni coins, and the gypsy offers me 5 rubles for it. Let him have it." So they clinched the bargain with a good drink, and the old man went home with the money, and the gypsy walked off with the horse. But it was not really a gypsy, but O, who had taken the shape of a gypsy. Then O rode off on the horse, and the horse carried him higher than the trees of the forest, but lower than the clouds of the sky. At last they sank down among the woods and came to O's hut, and O went into his hut and left his horse outside on the step. "This son of a dog shall not escape from my hands so quickly a second time," said he to his wife. At dawn O took the horse by the bridle and led it away to the river to water it. But no sooner did the horse get to the river and bend down its head to drink than it turned into a perch and began swimming away. Oh, without more ado, turned himself into a pike and pursued the perch. But just as the pike was almost up with it, the perch gave a sudden twist and stuck out its spiky fins and turned its tail toward the pike so that the pike could not lay hold of it. So when the pike came up to it, it said, "Perch, perch, turn thy head toward me. I want to have a chat with thee. I can hear thee very well as I am, dear cousin, if thou art inclined to chat," said the perch. So off they set again, and again the pike overtook the perch. "Perch, perch, turn thy head round toward me. I want to have a chat with thee." Then the perch stuck out its bristly fins again and said, "If thou dost wish to have a chat, dear cousin, I can hear thee just as well as I am." So the pike kept on pursuing the perch, but it was of no use. At last the perch swam ashore, and there was a Tsarevna Tsar's daughter whittling an ash twig. The perch changed itself into a gold ring set with garnets, and the Tsareva saw it and fished up the ring out of the water. Full of joy she took it home and said to her father, "Look, dear papa, what a nice ring I have found." The Tsar kissed her, but the Tsarevna did not know which finger it would suit best. It was so lovely. About the same time they told the Tsar that a certain merchant had come to the palace. It was O, who had changed himself into a merchant. The Tsar went out to him and said, "What dost thou want, old man?" "For I was sailing on the sea in my ship," said O, "and carrying to the Tsar of my own land a precious garnet ring, and this ring I dropped into the water. Has any of thy servants perchance found this precious ring?" "No, but my daughter has," said the Tsar. So they called the council, and O began to beg her to give it back to him. "For I may not live in this world if I bring not the ring," said he. But it was of no avail, she would not give it up. Then the Tsar himself spoke to her. "Nay, but, darling daughter, give it up, lest misfortune befall this man because of us. Give it up, I say." Then O begged and prayed her yet more, and said, "Take what thou wilt of me, only give me back the ring." "Nay, then," said the Tsarevna, "it shall be neither mine nor thine." And with that she tossed the ring upon the ground, and it turned into a heap of millet seed and scattered all about the floor. Then O, without more ado, changed into a cock and began pecking up all the seed. He pecked and pecked till he had pecked it all up. Yet there was one single little grain of millet which rolled right beneath the feet of the Tsarevna, and that he did not see. When he had done pecking, he got upon the window sill, opened his wings, and flew right away. But the one remaining grain of millet seed turned into a most beauteous youth, a youth so beauteous that when the Tsarevna beheld him she fell in love with him on the spot, and begged the Tsar and Tsarit to write piteously to let her have him as her husband. "With no other shall I ever be happy," said she, "my happiness is in him alone." For a long time the Tsar wrinkled his brows at the thought of giving his daughter to a simple youth, but at last he gave them his blessing, and they crowned them with bridal wreaths, and all the world was bidden to the wedding feast. And I too was there, and drank beer and mead, and what my mouth could not hold ran down over my beard, and my heart rejoiced within me.